Okay. Good morning, everybody. Dobre utro. How are you? And spasiba. And unfortunately, that's where my Russian stops. But we're going to have fun this morning nonetheless, I'm sure. Welcome, everyone, to Agile Days 2015. How cool is this? Everybody excited to get started? Now, I haven't planned conferences myself, but I have taken part in a number. And I know that this is just a tremendous feat of organization to get everyone here and get everyone scheduled and have a nice event. So before I start speaking, I'd really like to thank the organizers of the conference, Scrum Trek. Let's just give them a round of applause. And to also let you know that I'm very happy and honored to be here to speak today. I just arrived yesterday from Los Angeles. So I'm not exactly sure what time it is or where I am, but I will be able to talk about Agile. So that's what we're here to do. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Give me a show of hands, okay? All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, we're here to talk about developing the Agile mindset for organizational agility. Now, let me get an idea before we get started of whoops. Speaking of mindset, it's got a mind of its own. So I wanted to get an idea of who's here. And I can tell you just a little bit about myself to start. My name is Shannon Ewan. I am a career IT consultant. I've been a software developer, a business analyst, a project manager. Throughout my career, I started working on Agile projects in about 2006. I have been an Agile coach, trainer, and facilitator for a number of years, and I've worked with multinational organizations in the commercial sector, as well as large public sector organizations to do Agile transformation. So we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the ingredients for that today and sharing some stories. So I look forward to that. I look forward to sharing stories and exchanging knowledge, not just right now, but throughout the 2 days of the conference. So who in here is new to Agile? Show of hands. Okay, only a couple people. Who is at their first Agile conference? More than a handful, okay. Who was here last year at this conference? All right, so those of you who were here last year, you might see some synergy, a little bit of, it's a vastly different presentation, but you may see some conceptual synergy between what Dr. Ahmed Sidki presented last year and myself in terms of the Agile mindset. We work very closely together in the International Consortium for Agile Capacity. So who here works on Agile teams in a technical capacity as a developer or tester? Okay, handful. How about as a Scrum Master? Okay. How about as a coach? Just a couple of coaches. Product owners. Okay. Who is in leadership, leading organizations going through Agile transformations? Nice. Okay, so we have a really good mix of people. So I'm hoping you're here today because you're interested in Agile and Agile at scale, which is what I'm going to talk about. Now, before we get into the meat of the topic, I want to align on a few key concepts here. If we're going to talk about Agile and organizational agility, let us first align on what is Agile. It's hard to talk about a term like this if we're not all on the same page in terms of what it means. Yes?
I suppose the Agile is a set of different organizational practices which can be used to achieve better results in case of achieving better quality or achieving any other different organizational goals.
Okay. So a set of practices to achieve better results, to achieve better organizational goals. Good stuff. Anybody else care to share a comment? Okay. Well, in that case, I'm not sure. Oh, I thought I might be testing a new clicker here, but I'm not. So we're going to start out with an umbrella idea for Agile here. And everything you said is spot on. And as an umbrella term, we'd like to take this as Agile as a mindset. What do we mean by that, a mindset? A way of thinking, yeah, a way of thinking, a way of approaching work, right? And when we talk about a mindset towards something, we talk about what's the set of values, what's the set of attitudes, what's the set of behaviors that we bring to our work. And this slide shows a couple of examples. Welcoming change, failing early, value-driven delivery, consistent feedback and improvement, learning through discovery, small increments and feedback loops, okay? And all of these are concepts that we're going to talk about quite a bit for the next hour or so. Now, we have this mindset that's anchored in values. And everyone, or most people in here are familiar with the Agile Manifesto, I assume, correct? Okay. So in the software world, and we're also going to extrapolate this out beyond software because we're talking about Agile in organizations, we are anchored in 4 values, right? And these really are the 4 key things that we talk about when we talk about our mindset towards Agile implementations. We're looking at individuals and interactions, right? That is our focus over processes and tools. Working software, or in a more general term, working product. Customer collaboration, and responding to change. That's actually my personal favorite, is responding to change over following a plan. And again, we've got our principles, right? So we've got a mindset that's guided, or established by values and guided by principles. So we're looking at these things, that these are our guideposts, our North Star, if you will, as we're approaching an Agile implementation. Who here can name one of the Agile principles?
Interactions are more important than communication.
I'm sorry? Interactions more important than communicate? Okay. Something else that's one of the principles. So there's something about business and development collaborating on a day-to-day basis, right? Welcoming change, frequent delivery. Our highest priority is frequent delivery of workable software. So all of these aren't absolute directives that we must interpret by the letter, but they are guiding thoughts, guiding principles, right, that we want to ingrain into who we're being when we're doing Agile. Now, the differentiation I like to make here, and I think is going to be key to what we talk about when we talk about organizational agility, is where specific Agile practices lie in this hierarchy, right? So we have our mindset, our values, our principles, and then our practices. And our practices are much more about the tactical implementation. What are we doing on a day-to-day basis, right? So we say here that we can manifest this through an unlimited number of practices. How cool is that? What's powerful about this unlimited number of practices? You can choose anyone you want? Yes, we're always evolving. There's all kinds of new practices that we're creating as we learn more in the field, right? So we have certain predefined Agile frameworks that help us execute in an Agile manner that take a handful of these practices and put them together in a logical way, right? That is a means to an end. So our practices and process are a means to an end, and the end is that achieving better organizational results, delivering higher value within our organization and to our customers. So to expand on this, what we don't want to do is get trapped in one of these boxes here, right? So I'm assuming pretty much everyone here has heard of Scrum. Has anyone here not heard of Scrum? All right, either that or you won't admit that, but that's good. So Scrum is obviously a very, very popular way of executing on Agile projects. That said, it is made up of just a handful of practices, right? Retrospectives, sprints, which are time boxes, daily stand-ups, having a product owner, using a prioritized backlog, all of those are practices. Extreme programming, made up of 12 practices, right? More on the technical end of the spectrum. And what we have down below is what we call your own Agile process, and we're going to come back to this later on in the presentation. This is just to let you know that as you become, if you approach Agile from the mindset, from the being, from the embracing the values, you are unconstrained in what you can create in terms of a process that works for your organization. So you are not confined to Scrum, you're not confined to extreme programming. These might work extremely well, which is wonderful, and they might not, in which case you can do something different for your reality. Okay? Question, can you be doing Scrum and not be Agile? Yes. And those of you who are saying yes, why are you saying yes?
Well, because Scrum becomes some kind of hard tool for whole organization. It can work right when you change it. It was just practice and, well, okay, we'll do stand-ups or practice and stuff like that, but we don't learn from it. We don't involve anything.
Okay, so we're just placing another process, imposing another process on ourselves and saying we're doing stand-ups, we're doing retrospectives, but we're not really learning, we're not really improving. Did that capture what you said? Anybody else?
Going through the motions that we embrace in the ideas we come from, and we don't accept any adaptation.
Yeah, we're going through the motions. We stop adapting, we stop changing, we stop innovating, right? So yes, absolutely. You can be doing Scrum and not be Agile. The flip side of that is you can certainly be Agile and not be doing Scrum, right? So that's one of the biggest myths that we like to, or confusions rather, not myths. Biggest confusions that we like to unpack kind of at the beginning of this type of discussion is that there is not a one-to-one relationship between Agile and Scrum, right? There are many, many, many ways of being Agile, and Scrum is one of those ways, one of those very effective ways. Oh, mm-hmm.
To use Scrum as a whole process, it's not very useful because Scrum is mostly push us. Scrum is mostly pushing us to some agile thinking. It is not really. It's like a hypothetical idea to use Scrum and not to be agile. But it's possible. Yes, it is. But if you are trying to implement Scrum, you have to. You have to get some agile thinking. Otherwise, it will not work. It will be a hollow shell of nothingness. That's all.
Yes. So you have to, that's right, you have to approach, Scrum can be useful only if we are approaching this with an Agile mindset, right? If we really get the spirit of what's behind those practices. Okay, so we've introduced this concept some already. What we really want to think about is this interplay between being and doing, okay, when it comes to Agile, when it comes to organizational learning and transformation. So being Agile, looking at it as a mindset and culture, internalizing those values we talked about, right? Responding to change become part of your DNA or become something that's second nature to you. The doing of Agile is really in that practices part, which is equally important. However, we want to understand why we're doing the practices that we're doing. And this is important in terms of teams and individuals. It's, in my opinion, infinitely more important when we look at organizational agility. This ability to really understand the whys behind this, why we're doing what we're doing, what we can tailor, and what we want to keep the same. So let me pause here and just see if there's any comments or questions before we continue on. I can see the wheels turning in people's heads. Okay. So being Agile versus doing Agile, or being Agile while doing Agile. And this shows you just a little bit of an example of part of why being Agile is so important in terms of the day-to-day execution on Agile teams. if we look at kind of a typical, as I say typical, 2-week sprint or iteration, and the time that we spend actually executing the practices together as a team, that's that 22%, right? The other 78% is our time interacting, creating product, innovating, changing, collaborating as a team. That's that being. So the being is a much, much larger part of our time than the actual doing. Okay. So what does it mean to be agile? To summarize. He's not talking.
So it's not to follow the Scrum rules, but to in the other case just to follow the Agile not rules, but it's values, and it's 12 practices as well. So just actually it's I don't want to be apparent, but in the latest Scrum guide, it became more agile, I think, because they talk more about the transparency, about the people and so on. It's become less framework and more agile. So in terms of being agile.
Okay. Good stuff. Yeah, and the lady right behind you.
Hi, I think being agile is thinking every day of what we can do better than previous day.
All right. What can we do better today than we did yesterday? And what can we do even better tomorrow? Love it. And by the way, I recognize that all of you are commenting in either your second or third or fourth language. So, you're already leaps and bounds beyond me on that. So don't be shy if you have something to say. Okay. So I like sports analogies. I find that they traverse international borders. So being agile, that essence, right? We have plans. We don't mind planning. Planning is not a bad thing. It helps us to strategize. That said, once you get on the field, right, you can be guided by your general strategy, but it's much more about how you react, okay? So, and that's how we can tell, in terms of when we think about athletes, who is more or less agile. You can't possibly be in the locker room at a basketball game or a soccer game and plan what you're going to do and then just execute that step by step, right? Well, you could, but you would lose, right? So you're constantly reacting to the feedback that you're receiving. And the teams that do this well do it instinctively. It's second nature. It's part of their being. So it's not just on the individual level that this happens. While that is really, really important, it's even more important at that team level. Like, you can tell when you watch a really talented sports team if they've gelled, right? If they've become one, if there's a synergy there. So they're being agile. There's so much in the communication that's going on amongst the various team members. So before we jump into organizations, I want to recap the why a little bit as well, because we've talked about these things as a means to an end. So what are we trying to solve by being agile? Why do we have conferences like this? Why do we have this movement worldwide about transitioning to agile?
Hello. Well, actually, we are just not satisfied with processes and to the speed of development and the quality of development. And we've trying to find a solution how to improve all this. Agile is a methodology which has proved that it can help. That's why we're here, and we try to solve all the process and change something in general and to achieve our goals.
Okay. So we're not satisfied with where we are, and we're looking, okay? Next.
Yes. I think we want to better fit our customers' needs. That is why.
All right. And
In
then
other
there's
words, to better meet changing business requirements. So
better meet changing requirements.
yeah.
Just to sleep well, at least. To remove unnecessary problems inside the team. To remove between management, between customers, and to be more, to be more agile, and just to remove complications.
Okay. To both expose and then remove complications. To sleep well. Is that what you said? Yeah, okay. I'll take that.
Yeah, just one more. To add to that, to satisfy our customers, but also without killing ourselves in the process.
To satisfy our customers without killing ourselves. Yes, I could see a lot of value to that. Was there a comment over? Decrease the pain. Okay. There's a lot of laughter. I'm hearing a lot. It sounds like there are a number of people who can identify with what this gentleman said. Oh, heads nodding. Okay. All right. And whoops, I've got a little video here. Oh, goodness. So what just happened there? The wrong car. It was the wrong car. And more deeply, what is that car a metaphor for? Value? Effort. Yeah. That guy gets A+ for effort. Lots of points. Big kudos for effort. He did a nice job on the wrong thing. So, and I've seen that video probably 100 times, and I still laugh every time he slips in the snow. I don't know why, but anyway, that's to the side. Lots and lots of effort on the wrong thing. And a lot of you have talked about pain and not killing ourselves, right? So we don't want to kill ourselves working on the wrong thing. We want to be working on the right things, and in order to work on the right things, we have to get consistent feedback, right? So we want to avoid delivering the wrong product or system, responding to changing requirements. What else are we trying to solve? Fail fast. Why do we like to fail fast? It's cheaper to fail fast. Yeah. And it's fun to fail. Well, no. It's cheaper to fail fast, absolutely. And I think the other thing here is it's impossible, and this is why we've seen a lot of pushback towards more traditional plan-based ways of managing these creative processes, is it is impossible, no matter what you do, no matter how much time you put up front, there is no possible way you can predict everything that could happen, right? So the reason we say fail fast is we're going to fail at some point. We're going to get something wrong at some point. There is zero chance of doing this perfectly, of creating the perfect product the first time out, no matter how many hours and hours and hours and, you know, amounts of money that you spend planning. So let's get that failure out of the way and learn from it, right? Let's fail as quickly, fail, learn, fail, learn, fail, learn, fail, learn, right? Because we are dealing with an empirical process. We're innovating, we're software development, product development, dealing with an empirical process. And again, this is going back to the athletic analogy. This guy has to inspect and adapt, right? He can be a super, super well-trained surfer, but there's absolutely no way that he can predict 100% of the time what the behavior is going to be out there, right? So that is an empirical process, just like what we deal with every day in our jobs. So we are trying to solve this fear around failure. We're trying to remove the stigma around failure, because as long as we're looking to deliver value to our customers and collaborating, we're going to have to knock on some of the wrong doors before we open the right door. If we don't inspect and adapt, we're left with something like this, right? Where it's just inertia. We're just going in one way, waterfall, there's only one thing we can do. Only one way we can go, and it's down. No. It's a little bit of an extreme interpretation. But we can see this momentum and this inertia that just keeps us moving in the same direction, which in all likelihood is the wrong direction. So let me pause again for any comments or questions. Okay. No one has run out of the room yet, so that's a good sign. It may happen shortly. Yes?
Is there something where we cannot be agile?
Is there something where we cannot be agile? Meaning, are there places where agile will not work?
Something should be stable, because otherwise we can't follow.
Where something has to be stable?
Yeah, because basic principles, we have in agile, flexible work, everything is changing. We can't understand where we are.
Yeah, and that's a, if I'm understanding your point correctly, that's a great point to look at in terms of, we're here and we're, looking at knowledge work and innovation and empirical processes. Where does it make sense to not inspect and adapt? To let things be stable?
Gastronomy.
In gastronomy, talk more about that.
You can prepare you can prepare perfect food if you just precisely follow the receipt.
Okay. So there's some science, and let me take this analogy a little bit further to baking, right? There's a lot of science around baking, so you have to mix things a certain way in order to get this cake or these cupcakes, right? Now, one could say that in the art of cooking, yes, you can inspect and adapt. However, there are times when, you found the perfect answer and you want to stick with that, okay? What else?
What to do if you run out of ingredients?
If you run out of?
Ingredients in cooking.
That's a good point. Sometimes you have to be agile. That's right. You don't want to be in my kitchen when I run out of ingredients because that's not an aptitude that I have. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely, any process can be viewed as empirical and need creativity. But what's important here is looking at the degrees of this, right? So what is the tolerance for agility? In some ways, you could argue that agility is always welcome. In other places, you might want to have the agility in the planning phase, but not in the execution phase, for example, right? Yes?
What about building a nuclear bomb or a rocket?
Yeah, okay. So not necessarily my area of expertise, but I will say that the more life-critical the operation, at times, yes, you want people on your team who can be agile and think creatively, but yeah, there are some times where let's try this out and see what happens might not make the most sense, right? I think another place where you might see that is in the medical arena, right? So again, there's always a balance. If you're having surgery, you do want your surgeon to be able to react if something doesn't go according to plan. However, you probably don't want him or her trying new things, right? So situational awareness is very, very key here, right? So thank you for that, for bringing up that topic. All right. So our established set of beliefs and approaches to enable success when there is uncertainty. We've talked about this a bit. And this is just a summary. Yoda is also universal, right? Is Yoda known? So I wanted to the laser pointer? Mindset. Okay. Thank you. All right. see if we're in the right spot here. Okay. So now, we've talked a lot about the mindset. We've talked a lot about the attributes that we're going for, the values, this spectrum of how much we want to experiment, when. Why do we care? What does this, so looking back to the title of this talk about developing the Agile mindset for organizational agility, what does all of the stuff that we've talked about have to do with organizational agility? Looked like someone in the back was about to say something. There's a hand right there.
Well, it's the same on the bigger scale. Well, the organization should be agile as well, because the situation on the organization level is changing quickly, and well, there is competitors, and well, we need to react to what they are doing, what the environment changes, and so on.
Okay, so we're looking at this complex ecosystem in which our organizations are living. And one of the points I'd like to make here too is, I think the Agile mindset it's important for individuals, it's important for teams and groups, and it's even more important for organizations because of the complexity that you're dealing with when you're trying to transition an entire organization as opposed to a handful of people or a team. The complexities are just much, much greater, and that's where that ability to tailor the process and that situational awareness and understanding is infinitely more important, right? That's where we have to be able to break through standard processes. That's where we have to be able to aggregate organizational learning very quickly in order to take the values and make them work at a much more macro, complex level. We're also reacting to we're reacting to a more complex set of forces as well, as this gentleman mentioned, in terms of market forces, competitors. I mean, there's both within our organization and external, all kinds of factors that are impacting what we're dealing with and that are either threatening or enabling our success. So that's that foundation to really understand the mindset and approaching it from the being of Agile as opposed to just the doing of Agile. Okay, I believe we've covered the benefits we hope to get. Just to recap there, what benefits are we looking to get from transforming to Agile? Building the right thing?
Response to changes.
Response to changes? Yeah, doing the right things faster. And not going out of not going out of business. All right, that's a good one. Yes, unless you do it fast, in which case you failed fast. No. Yeah, exactly. We're trying to stay in business. I would argue that we look at empirical processes, we look at organizations. One of the key components, if not the key component, to organizational success is talent, right? The brain power, the people. And you here, as there's a lot of brain power in this room, I can sense it. What do you want from the organization that you work for? To be successful? What else?
Well, it's kind of support and in this case, agility, because it's supporting the changes that the people from the low level, you can say, just can push to the high management.
Mm-hmm.
While in case of the entire organization is just being a successful organization, because you want to work for a successful organization, and
yeah, okay. You want to work for a successful organization, and on the softer side, you want to be valued, right? You want to help generate value, and you want to be valued, and you want to be in a situation where you're empowered and you're using your talents and learning and growing yourself as well on your path, right? So that becomes a virtuous relationship there. It's like the better an organization does, the more talent you can attract, the better you treat your talent, the more talent you attract, get better products, and on and on and on. Now, one of the things that I do just want to mention, this is a little bit of a brief tangent here, is this notion of being at choice. And I think this audience is definitely skewed towards the innovative and seeing the reasons behind organizational agility. In terms of adopting a mindset, though, you can't really fake a mindset. Your values are your values. It's very hard. A mindset is something that has to be ingrained and authentic. Whereas several of you mentioned when we were talking about the doing, you can go through the motions. You can kind of just fake your way through the day, went to another retrospective, went and did a stand-up, yada, yada, yada. You can't fake that, the agility at the core. And so the reason this is here is it's looking at this element of being at choice, of choosing Agile, right? Of getting that understanding within the organization behind the whys, what are we really trying to achieve? This is a means to an end. What are those ends? All of these are really key questions. And we want, at the individual, team, and organization level, to be ready for this and to choose it, right? No, I'm not talking about everybody needing to be in a room and all voting, yes, let's go Agile. But the education, getting the teams and individuals on board with what we're trying to achieve and why this is a win-win for what we're trying to do. Is anybody currently working in organizations where you're transitioning to Agile and there are people who just are not happy with how things are going? Yeah. And what's behind that, if anybody would like to share an example? Laziness, okay. And we'll come back to that point. Yep.
We have chaos in our company.
Chaos.
Chaos.
Okay.
Everybody thinks that we should be agile. Everybody does what they think.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, usually the problem is problem comes because people not quite ready to change, because changing mindset is a very, very difficult thing.
Yes. That's right. Thank you for that. And then I think we had...
Yes, and I want to a little bit oppose, because a little bit. The problem is that there are not... The problem is that there are commitment of changes only for a relatively young people, unfortunately. But we have, for example, staff which are at several teams which are together for 20 years. They do not readily transform themselves into anything. And sometimes they are eager to accept some practices, but not the pace of changing is not compatible with them.
Okay.
They have to slow down a bit, and sometimes it's reasonable. They have good arguments to do this.
Okay, yes, so sometimes we have things that are really, really well ingrained. And we need to take a situational approach to that, right? As I believe I heard there, sometimes it's justified. So how do we work with that, and how do we get the right pace of change? And change as a very difficult thing, which all of that, it's as though you all could see forward into the slides, because those are very relevant points as we move forward. So if we've decided that we want to get there, we're at choice, we can see the value of doing this. Gosh, how do we do it? Just looking at that diagram kind of makes me nervous. Right? Thinking about driving around in rush hour and not having any idea where to go. There are many, many ways, right? How do we get there and how do we not get there are two important questions. Let's see. So we talk about organizational approaches. Scaling is one approach that we hear about, right? Which is taking teams where Agile's working well and trying to spread it through the organization. I'm not opposed to that as an approach. However, kind of bringing this back to this notion of being and doing, there's a transformation that happens as well, which is bigger than scaling, right? It's that synergistic moment where things click. You know, to use the analogy from nature, the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, where you're no longer exactly the same organization that you were before. So it's not just about taking something and making it bigger. It's about becoming something new. And again, how do we get anywhere we've never been before, right? So what we're about to delve into is focus on learning and look at how organizational learning fits into this notion of being and doing, and how that then feeds into this notion of transformation, okay? And actually, having had a very practical example of this morning, how do you get anywhere you've never been before? You ask a lot of questions and hope that the person you're talking to might be able to answer. Okay, so I'm going to introduce this notion of the competence learning model. Has anyone heard of this, the 4 levels of learning? Okay. And this is relevant to how we change, and this is relevant to this notion of being and doing, right? So anytime we're learning something new, and if we're becoming agile as an organization, we have to be learning new things, right? Not only are we learning new things, part of the reason we're becoming agile is so that we can learn faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. So we want to both get into this learning and then accelerate it. So anytime I start learning something new, before I start learning something new, I'm at a state of unconscious incompetence, meaning I don't know what I don't know, okay? Once we realize we want to learn something or there's a value to learning something, we go to conscious incompetence, okay? So I'll use a common analogy that I think most of us can relate to. Who in here drives a car? Most people, okay. So if you never had a need to drive a car, you could stay in this stage forever. It wouldn't matter, right? And this unconscious incompetence, you have no idea how to do it, you don't want to know. Once you realize that there's a need, there's a benefit to this, there's a benefit to driving a car, there's a benefit to learning to speak a new language, that's when you start to try to acquire the skill, and you move to this conscious incompetence, meaning I have this awareness of the fact that I don't know what I'm doing, right? And that can be a fairly uncomfortable stage. And then you get to the stage of conscious competence, where you know what you're doing and you're staying focused on it. So if you think about as you got better and better at driving, it's like, okay, yes, I'm signaling now, I'm turning this way. And then you eventually want to move into unconscious incompetence, which is, I got in my car and I ended up at work and I have no idea what happened on the way, right? How many of you are at that stage with driving at this point? Is anybody still in that conscious incompetence? I hope not. Although I will say, this is not just a one-way progression, right? When you throw in variables, and this is where agility comes in, you can regress in stages, right? So right now, I'm as a driver, am at this unconscious competence stage. However, if I rented a car and tried to drive in Moscow, I'd go back right there very quickly, right? So when circumstances change or become infinitely more complex, that's where you need to go back to that stage of conscious incompetence and conscious competence and learning, okay? And so I'm going to recap what these stages are, and then we're going to talk about why this matters in terms of as transitioning to Agile. Okay, so to boil it down, unconsciously incompetent, I don't know what I don't know. I have no awareness of what I don't know. And there are many, many, many things. I mean, we could all live 1,000 lifetimes and never learn everything that there is to know, right? There are many things that I will remain unconsciously incompetent, ignorant of, probably for the rest of my life. So in order to move to this stage of consciously incompetent, we have to actually see a need to know this, a need to change. And this is, okay, I now know what I don't know. So I'm going to do automated testing. I've never done that before. Okay, this is going to take some time. I'm going to need to learn this. And then we get into this consciously competent. I grow and know, and it starts to show. So I'm like, okay, I know what I'm doing. People can come to me and ask for help, right? And then this unconsciously competent, it's like you're just in the zone. You know, if you look back at the two soccer players that we showed in the beginning, or you know, you think about people in here, I'm sure there are plenty of people in here who are really gifted software developers, where you just see a problem and you just sit down and you solve it. So it's not like you're thinking through all these steps. You just do it, right? So does anybody have any comments or questions about this model? Did I see something? Okay. Yeah, you have to be careful not to like scratch your head around me or anything, because I might be like, yes, you. No. Okay. All right, how is everyone doing? Are we still excited to be here? All right, very good. So the being and doing of this, okay? So I'm relating this back to the being and doing of Agile and why this is important to some of the obstacles that you all identified when we were talking about transformation and how some situations are chaos, there's a lot of resistance. So we look here at our progression, and this purple circle here shows where you're in a common state of being, right? So in unconscious incompetence and unconscious competence, there's still this going with the flow second nature, right? So there's not a ton of awareness and need to really focus on what you're doing. This can be a really comfortable place, right? We're just in the zone, things are just happening and we're not worrying about it. We don't have to focus on it or think through everything. The next stages 2 and 3 are similar in being in terms of the consciousness, right? So the being deliberate, whether it's being deliberate in, oh my gosh, I don't know this and I need to learn it, or deliberate in, yes, I'm getting this, I'm getting the steps, I'm learning the dance. So what's complicated here is when people are comfortable in kind of being in the zone, right? We want them to get to this zone, but in order to do that, they have to go to that uncomfortable state of, oh my gosh, this stage 2, right? Which is the least comfortable place to be. So we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable in order to progress. Thank you. Similarly, we've got this similarity in doing here. On the conscious, on stages 1 and 2, the doing of being incompetent. So not succeeding, not doing something well, okay? Whereas over here, the doing is similar in terms of the competence. So we're at competence, and it's just our mindset about it that's different. It's at the top, it's not yet ingrained, and here it is ingrained. Now notice there is a little bit of a judgment around the doing, right? If I were to ask you, would you rather be incompetent or competent, what would you say? Competent, right? That there tends to be a judgment around that, to say that being competent is good, being incompetent is less desirable. Whereas in the being, this is where the awareness is important. The conscious and unconscious can be good or bad depending on the situation and what you're trying to do, right? As I said, as the surgery example, if something goes wrong and I'm in surgery, I'd like there to be an element of unconscious competence in my surgeon, because he or she's just going to know what to do and how to react. Not, oh my gosh, I got to go back to Google Medical Journal and figure this out. No, we don't want that, right? Sometimes we do want very conscious competence. Like think about how many of you in here are trainers or teachers in some way in your job? You want to be able to train. People who are consciously competent tend to make good trainers because they know what it takes to learn something new. Whereas sometimes when somebody gets to the unconscious competence, it's so second nature that they can't even explain it to someone else necessarily, right? I play guitar, and my father also plays guitar, and he's been playing for decades and decades and decades. And we'll be playing together, and he'll be like, oh, just do it like this. Oh, thank you. That's helpful. So there's that difference between being consciously competent and unconsciously competent. And the reason I'm saying this is that awareness of where you are on the being scale is really, really powerful in terms of how you look at transformation. And we're about to talk about how this is relevant. So you all mentioned the change model and chaos, right? I heard the word chaos. This is a common model, the Virginia Satir change curve, that talks about status quo, whoa, we're changing, and we're in this zone, and then we start to really hit this conscious competence as a group, and then things just shoot up exponentially, like I talked about. It's a transformation, not just a scaling, but a transformation, right? And so being aware of those stages and what you have to progress through as a team and as an organization and as a person helps you realize, okay, I'm feeling a lot of chaos. That's normal. And look at what's on the other side of this for me. And then you make the determination, is this worth it? Right? So by knowing that journey, by knowing where you fall or where your team falls, or if you're as a leader, where your organization falls, will help you figure out what the next steps in terms of education and learning and process need to be put in place in order to get you to that new, higher status quo. Make sense? So how many people in here feel like your Agile teams are in this stage right now? I see this hesitation. Oh, my teammate's right there. I can't say this. No. Who feels like they're over here? All right. So people are getting there. So recognizing this as a journey, and that, yes, the change is difficult, and we are consciously, it's not just a matter of start doing these practices, it's become something else, learn something new, right? Which isn't something that can just happen with a magic wand. Bringing us right back to where we started, which is why it's so critical to understand this, that we can't just impose a process on our organization. We can't just take a large-scale framework and bam, we are Agile. There's so much, not that large-scale frameworks aren't good, they are, but there's so much being in education and learning and gelling that needs to happen, right? Transforming. I'm just going to go through this really briefly. It will come up a little bit in tonight's workshop and then next week in class. But part of the reason I bring this up is that, for those of you who are coaches and coaching transformation, this model has a few cool things to say about the skills that you use as a coach to recognize the being and the doing of Agile and where your teams and organizations are in that cycle. And mainly what I'm focusing on here are these skills of training, mentoring, professional coaching, and facilitating, right? So the mentoring and training are much more on the doing of Agile, right? It's the practices. How do I get better at running stand-ups? How do I get better at managing my backlog? How do I get better at automated testing? Okay, we want to actually look at the doing and training on that, right? Whereas the coaching and the facilitating are much more around the process and creating the right containers for teams and organizations to change and to identify with where they want to go. It's really holding that vision of where we want to be as a value-based organization, as an organization that cares about its talent, that wants to beat its competitors. So the coaching and facilitating is much more about, let's create this space for the ideas to come forth, right? So it's not the coach coming with an answer, it's the coach coming with the process to see where the great ideas will emerge. So it's enabling that self-organization that we talk about a lot with Agile and care about a lot with Agile. So this is really helping teams and organizations along with that being of Agile, and the teaching and mentoring side is much more around the doing of Agile. And this is something that I love to talk about and could talk about for a long time, and I won't do it right now, I promise. But if I'm obviously here for a few days, so if you want to talk to me more about this, the coaching element in terms of transition and change to Agile, I'm more than happy to chat about this some point in the next couple days. Okay, so we're going to speed it up here a little bit. We've got about 20 minutes left. So we talk about approaches to transformation, and one of the key ingredients, I believe here, is this continuous multidirectional learning. So there's a relationship between the organization and the individuals and vice versa. Well, there's a bidirectional relationship between teams and individuals and between teams and organizations. And it's that constant flow, continuous improvement, continuous learning, lessons learned that helps us become something new, become agile. I strike through this because we hear people talk about this top-down approach or bottom-up approach to transformation. So, do we need to have buy-in at the executive level and then have it trickle down? Do we need to have a grassroots movement for the teams and have it scale up? Neither of those are bad, but they're not the solution in and of themselves, right? It's not a hierarchy. It's an interplay. It's a collaboration. So a couple points here to keep in mind. Contextualizing this. So what do we need to be at the individual team and organizational levels, and what do we need to do to succeed with Agile? And why do these questions matter, right? So we want to look at this notion of tailored implementation that we talked about, your own Agile process, your own continuous improvement, the feedback that you're getting, right? There's not a recipe for becoming Agile necessarily. There are strategies and tools and techniques which we're talking about here. But if there were just one way to do Agile, that would be an oxymoron, right? That wouldn't make sense. That in and of itself, just to say that there's one way of doing things is in and of itself un-Agile. Does anyone disagree with that? Cool. Or you're thinking about coffee and don't have the energy to disagree. So we want to look at this. Why are we going Agile in the first place is another big key. What are the benefits that we are trying to achieve in our organization? They're going to be similar in some ways to other organizations. What we care about is what's unique, what's that special sauce, right? And that's going to help us tailor, and it's going to help us prioritize how we're becoming Agile. This last piece is really around extending beyond software, right? So what organizational structures and norms incentivize Agile behaviors? And this is another thing I could talk about for quite some time. One example I'll give is if you look at talent, the people in your organization. Very simple example. We talk a lot about Agile and teams and team performance and teams getting things done. Yet, what if your corporate structure rewards individual results? What are you as a person driven to do, right? If you're compensated or rewarded or rated on your performance relative to someone else's, that may or may not support collaborative behavior. If you look at your budgeting cycle and you're trying to organize things at a portfolio or project level according to priority, but you have to do your finance forecasting 2 to 3 years in advance, it becomes very difficult to react and fund the right priorities. And this is a much larger topic, but I just wanted to introduce, and those are all things to think about because organizational agility involves much more than software or product development. It's the whole organization understanding the values and the aspirations and creating the structures to support those. The old economic cliche of people responding to incentives. Okay, so value-based transformation. So this is a little bit of a meta. So we want to, in Agile we like to be value-based. We want to do the things that are the highest value. And we want to take that same approach when we approach our transformation to Agile. So let's look at what are the most important things for us to be and do, and how do we put them at the forefront of our transformation plan. So balancing that being and doing of your Agile transformation. And then capitalizing on this synergistic approach. So we've had a number of things today where we've talked about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, right? What is going to help us actually transform? What do we need to learn next to really have things gel? So thinking along those lines. The other comparison or a point that I'll make here is a value-based approach to transformation. And also, because we're looking at the being of Agile, it is a values-based okay, so with an S. So we're looking at what is most important to this organization. We're basing it on those values, and then also looking at what do we have to be and do in order to achieve that, and how can we prioritize then how we want to do our Agile transition. Okay, so utopia, we've gotten through this, we've transformed, we're an Agile organization. How do we stay Agile? By changing? With an Agile mindset? Yep. I think I heard with an Agile mindset, and I think I also heard by changing, and I love both of those answers. Is that what I heard? All right. Yes, we have an Agile mindset, and we continue to change, and we've hit that curve, that spike up on the change curve, and also that level of competence where we now have these Agile values, this Agile mindset ingrained, and we can change and respond much more quickly because we've got the structures in place to do so. We've picked the practices, the Agile practices that enable us. And I've got some good news. Agile processes evolve, okay? So yes, we are going to have to do new practices. That's why we have the unlimited practices. I'm giving you the bad news first, actually. No. We can tailor new practices, new processes. There's going to be a new Agile framework coming out, I'm sure, within the next year or so. There's always new ways of doing things. Agile processes evolve, which is why we say, let's not invest the whole hog into doing Scrum. Maybe Scrum's not right for our organization. And I don't mean to pick on Scrum. Maybe it's extreme programming. Maybe it's safe. Agility, however, is here to stay. Okay? So we're always going to want to improve and innovate and respond to change and react and empower teams and be self-organized. Those are things that we're going, so we adopt this mindset. We're there. And we're empowered to then deal with the process evolution. Because we know what our core values are. We know what we have to keep consistent and what we can change, right? So agility is what we're trying to achieve. And then we can evolve our process and the tactics and how we actually implement on the ground from there. Anyone want to react to that? Okay, please disagree.
I guess.
We're out of time. I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, I guess to be agile or to be something else, we need to have a higher level of our goal. We need to have a next goal. We need to be agile plus, I would say, more than agile. We need to have next goal. Then we can be still agile. If we have no next goals, if we have no goals to go up, we won't be agile.
Absolutely.
We will be dropped.
And I think we do agree, and you said it better than I did. So let me recap what you said. That's right. So agility is here to stay, meaning that, as you said, and as you just pointed out, we have to keep changing. So our next goal is to evolve with the next process. What is the next best thing to do? What's the next innovation, right? But we're poised with our Agile mindset to react to that. So I believe that we're in perfect agreement, and I also believe that you said that very, very well. Are we aligned on that, or did I misinterpret?
I guess it's different levels.
Okay.
You're speaking about evolving in horizontal levels, I guess. And I'm saying about being agile plus to agile next to
Yep.
We can develop next to agile.
Yes. Okay, so that vertical, and the term, and I think if I'm understanding correctly, the term might become something else as well, right? So we might not be calling it Agile 5 years from now. The idea is, if we have agility, the noun, and the mindset, then we can continue to innovate and do what we need to do to succeed as an organization. Because to your point, it's that success and the value delivery, that's what we're trying to achieve. Agile, or whatever the right process is a means to achieving that higher goal. Right. All right, thank you for that. Okay, so essentially in summary then, we're just going to spin through some fun little statements here. So some keys to sustainability. Going back to that 4 stages of the levels of learning. Commit to continuous learning and improvement, and cultivate that awareness of the stages within yourself and within teams. And as a coach, that's even more critical, to get people to understand that change curve and that discomfort of learning something new. Internalize that overall vision. So this is more of the being. That what is the vision for this organization? What's the vision for this team? What are we ultimately trying to achieve, and how can we use a process in order to get there? This touches on what I covered briefly in terms of organizational structures beyond software, which is align the accountability structures with that vision. If you're in organizational leadership and you want teams to perform, reward team results, right? If you want to be able to manage your portfolio and inspect and adapt and be more flexible, then work with your finance department in order to figure out how best to do that. So focusing on becoming as opposed to linear scaling, right? So it's not just we're building it up and up and up. We're actually becoming something new. And lastly, take a tailored approach to your implementation and transformation. And that will equip you to continue to take that higher step, right? You won't be so invested in one particular way of doing. You're flexible in the being, and that will enable you to adjust and figure out what is the next right thing. This is a question to leave you all with to ponder while you're drinking coffee. No. What are you willing to do and to be for the sake of sustainable agility? So thinking about that over the time you're at this conference, or as you're conversing with your colleagues, new people that you're networking with, what are you willing to bring to the table to sustain agility? Unless somebody wants to share right now, which and here's a couple of last, sort of in the format of the manifesto, some things that I just wanted to share. So looking for experimentation over precision, right? Learning over making sure that things are perfect. Asking the right questions over having the right answers. So there's always more to learn. Be curious about what your teams need, about what your organization needs, about what your customer needs, right? Know what you don't know, going back to that, and be ready to ask the right questions. Innovating over imitating. So we talked about knowledge work versus task work. So look at, a lot of times we're dealing in product development with things that haven't happened yet. So that's where this failing early comes into play. We want to innovate, not imitate. And back to that whole notion of organizational learning and the competence learning model. Learning what to learn over knowing what you know. So it's great to know things, it's great to have expertise. The challenge is not to stagnate there, right? It's what do I learn next as an organization, as a person, as a team. Okay. And then, again, this becomes a virtuous cycle in terms of sustainability. So agility is both a catalyst for and an outcome of agile process evolution, right? So we want agility, so that's going to cause us to evolve our processes, and by evolving our processes, we can sustain our agility. So it's all come full circle. We end where we started. No, I hope we're a little bit beyond that. Okay, so that is basically the presentation. Stay hungry, stay agile, be agile whenever possible, and my apologies for not having the Cyrillic alphabet on my computer when I put that on there, but spasiba for your attention. I believe we have a couple of minutes if there's any questions or comments. I have this gentleman in the back there. Oh, you missed your opportunity, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Stepping back to the part of learning and studying, if you want to change your organization or change your team, I just have one addition based on my experience that it is very important, of course, to make some education for your team, to change mindset, to be to make your team agile. But the second important thing, I think, it is you need to be ready to sell your ideas. It is a little bit another thing. You need to have these skills to sell ideas of agile, and it sometimes it helps to find a good approach to people who are conservative, for example, and maybe first not ready for changes and so on. So you or somebody in your team should sell your ideas, should sell these approaches and so on.
That's a great addition. So, and essentially, if I'm hearing what you're saying, you're getting at those benefits of why should people even care about moving from the unconscious incompetence to the conscious competence? You have to be able to convince them that it will benefit them. Is that essentially what you're getting at? Thank you.
Just the question about, is it not utopistic to say that it is always changing? There is time to change, and there is time to summarize the outcomes of this. You cannot always be in the first place. You have to stay and to wait for your colleagues to be here. Otherwise, you will break your organization in parts. And what's your visions? What's your comments about this? What is the? I understand that the optimum pace is dependent on organization, but what is your experience in this case?
Yeah, so I could go a lot of different ways with that. The thing that first popped into my head was, to everything there is a season, right? A time to change, a time to stabilize. And I think what was a little bit glossed over in there was in those beginning stages, because I talked a lot about things being, the curve being like this and then, right? So when you're at those initial stages, and this is kind of where the coaching comes in and the awareness of where is the team in the organization, okay, where do we need to get to in terms of shared understanding? What foundation do we need to have in place before we can move forward? Because I absolutely agree with you that if you get into the spiral of just something new, something new, something new, you're also not going to be value-based. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot, so to speak. So it's that constant check of where is the team? What is sustainable, both in terms of agility and in terms of the pace of change? So there is a lot there, and in my experience, I've worked with organizations where, my gosh, a lot of time you had to invest a lot of time up front to get everyone on board, and then finally get to the point where we're seeing this work, and we're going to gel. And I've had other experiences where people are ready and raring to go and eager. So a lot of that is gauging that culture and looking at the structures that are in place to help with change and to support change, and then also being aware that change is not the end. Being value-based and being successful is the end. So if it makes sense to stay the same for a while we stabilize, then we can. And I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you.
So I would like to agree with the previous speaker. Plus one colleague, yes, so when changes are made just to stay agile, everybody gets very tired of them. And together with that, I would say that you have to implement changes, but you have to not implement changes just to implement changes. You have to constantly be in the process of recognition if you need changes, not in the process of implementing changes. So when you recognize that you need some, then you implement it, and it goes smoothly.
Yep. Yeah, and that comes back to that holding that vision. What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah, right.
And do we need to change to achieve that, or do we need to do more of the same?
Yeah, right,
Yep.
right. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, gotta.
how do you think about changes every 2 weeks in, for example, every sprint? Previous persons told that there is necessity to stabilize. We have 1.5 years when we change every 2 weeks and we didn't have problems with it. Maybe it's unusual.
And you were successful changing process every sprint?
Yeah.
Well, and that's another thing that's very specific to team maturity. And I think also the size of the changes, right? So getting used to how much change can your team take? How mature is the team? It's sort of analogous to doing continuous delivery versus doing releases every 3 sprints. Your team has to be at a certain level of maturity to do that. Same thing with, it sounds like your team was able to handle continual process improvements. I've definitely worked with teams where I can tell that something's going to take a while to catch on. And so it's like, okay, we made this change 1 sprint ago. It's not working for us yet, but let's be patient and see a couple more sprints. So a lot of that is going to be very situational in terms of the size of the change and how well the team is working together, how much of a unit the team is already. Does that make sense? All right. Last question? All right, well then I guess I get the last word. Well, thank you all very much. I look forward to being here the next 2 days and hearing more and learning from you all, and this is a great experience. So thanks to all of you and to Scrum Trek for organizing.
Я осторожно, я вообще сжал такой, типа, я хоть послушаю, что здесь. Раз, держи, короче. А я такой же думаю, блин, что-то, короче, я говорю, слишком много воды, как бы, так, ну, не знаю, я люблю больше такой детальные такие, да? Я уже свалил, думаю,